Hey, thanks folks for tuning into this video today. I'm going to offer some thoughts on the first chapter of the Gospel of John, particularly the first 18 verses, which are called the prologue to the Gospel of John. And if you have a Bible or access to just look it up online, you can read that. If you want to pause the video and read that, then feel free to do so. One of the key things that you will notice about these first 18 verses is the number of times that you see the word word. And in most English translations, this word is capitalized, and that's because the word in this case is a person, and you've probably figured that out. Maybe you're familiar with the Bible a little bit, and maybe you already knew that, but maybe not. Maybe there's somebody watching who wasn't aware of that. And I think it's an interesting question to ask, why is this word chosen as kind of like a title for Jesus in this situation? Why is he called the Word? It's kind of an interesting thing to call somebody. One of the things that I like to do when I'm reading the Bible is I will pick a key word, or at least a word that seems important, maybe because you see it repeated a number of times in a particular passage, or because it just jumps off the page at you and you think that it's a really important word. It seems like a thematic word and it's a big idea word, something like that. So I will pick a key word and then I will list some synonyms of that word to try to kind of unpack maybe some other associations and really dig into, like, why is this word chosen here? Why is this what we have been given in this passage? So we might ask questions like, what does it say about Jesus's identity and character and his purpose? Why is it that he's called the Word? Some synonyms that I thought of were conversation, communication, speaking, saying something, information, ideas, concepts, truth, description, revelation, not being silent. There's a Christian author named C.S. Lewis who talks about how Jesus is what the Father has to say, and that's why he's called the Word. And so I think it's just interesting to unpack a little bit of that and to think that conversation, communication, truth, revelation, not being silent, not leaving us in the dark, these are all ideas that are helpful for us to understand why Jesus is called the Word and why that is significant to our understanding of who he is. And then it talks about how, in verse 4, it talks about how the life of the Word, God, is what gives light. It literally says, in him was life, and that life was the light of men, or of people. So there's this sense in which the very life of God, the kind of life that he has, not just the fact that he's alive, but the type and quality of life that he is, gives meaning, vision, color, shape, direction, and joy to the very quality of our existence as human beings. In other words, we are not left in perpetual darkness because we were lovingly created by the divine craftsman. We're not the result of accidental, purposeless, impersonal forces. There is a word behind the universe, behind our existence. There is meaning. So it's important that Jesus is called the Word because on a fundamental level, that means that all of reality, including our life, is infused with meaning, with purpose, and we are given that value and purpose by the author who speaks those words. Sometimes when I'm reading the Bible, I also like to ask questions. A good friend of mine, Glenn Cook, he's on Young Life staff, and he's one of my trainers. He used to call this the practice of peppering. So it's sort of like, can take a pepper shaker and you're just shaking questions all over the text. I wouldn't recommend actually getting out the pepper shaker, but I think you get the point. The idea is that you're asking questions of the text. You're not even necessarily going to try to answer them all, but it's the practice of curiosity. It's the practice of I wonder why this was written. I wonder why John said that, or I wonder why Jesus was described this way. And that practice of curiosity is so important in our faith, because we might end up finding an answer to that question at some point later, but maybe not. But at the very least, our mind has been focusing on God, and it has caused us to maybe think a little bit deeper than we have before. Curiosity and wonderment are great things to try to cultivate in our relationship with God. Because one of the questions that I asked is about verses 10 and 11. It's a little bit confusing. I asked the question, how did the world and his own not recognize Jesus? Because it says, Jesus was in the world, and the world was made through him, yet the world did not recognize him. He came to his own, and his own people did not receive him. So I asked the question, how is that possible? How did the world not recognize him? Why didn't they receive him? And I wonder, is it because were those people looking for something else? Were they longing for a different kind of rescue than Jesus actually brought? And so when he showed up, they didn't recognize him, and because they weren't necessarily looking for him and who he was. Maybe they had misread something in their Bible, which we would call the Old Testament. Or maybe people had been taught a skewed misinterpretation of the Old Testament, so that they were looking for a different Messiah, which is a figure in the Jewish consciousness that was this kind of rescuing figure sent from God. And so maybe they were looking for something else, and Jesus wasn't exactly what they thought. And it makes me wonder too about our lives. Are there times when Jesus' presence is close to us? It is near us, and maybe we've even encountered him, but we don't recognize him because we're looking for something else. And that kind of scares me. Excuse me. It kind of scares me, the thought that I might miss Jesus and I might not recognize him, even if he were to come near. And so that when I read something like that in the Bible, it challenges me. I write it down, and it's something to help me remember to look for Jesus, and that by reading this passage, it tells me who to look for. It tells me, here's who Jesus is, so look for this. If you want to find Jesus, if you would like to see him and notice him and acknowledge where he is in your life and in your day and in this very moment, then you got to know what to look for. And then I talked about, I'm just reading off of this really cool scripture journal thing that I have, scripture on one side and then journaling on the other side. So that's what I'm using today for the next couple minutes here. And then for verse 12, I wrote down, what does it mean when it talks about believed in his name? Why is it so important that people believed in Jesus's name? Why does his name matter so much? And I wrote down some of these words. This is like believing in his name is like trusting in him. It's an allegiance to him. It's confidence in who he is and what he calls himself and who he says he is. Now, the rest of the book of John, which I'm not going to talk about today, goes on to reveal so much about what Jesus says about himself. And in fact, the book of John is really unique in that there are a lot more sayings that Jesus, where Jesus talks about himself and makes claims about who he is than any other gospel. So it's my personal favorite. All the Bible is breathed out by God and is useful for many things in teaching, correction, and rebuking and training in the right way of living, the right way of thinking. That's in one of the Timothys. I can't remember off the top of my head. I once knew. I once had that one memorized, but now I know it's in one of the Timothys, which is better than nothing, I guess. But I'm going to go look that up after this video. So those are some of the most important things that I have seen up to that point. But I think one of the most important parts of the prologue of the Gospel of John is in verse 14. It says, "And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. We have seen his glory. Glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth." It says that the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. There's a paraphrase of the Bible called the Message, and the Message translation, or the Message paraphrase rather, in that verse says, "The Word became flesh and blood and moved into the neighborhood." And I think that's a really cool way to put it. It's so important to note that the Word, everything that God wanted to say, the God who is love, who created us for a purpose, and who has given us infinite value because he created us in his image, that he became a human being. He became one of us in order to speak to us in our terms and our language and to be on our level so that we might fully understand what he has to say. The God who has everything to say and is the God of all truth and of all reality and of all love, that he became one of us so that we might fully see him and understand. And not only did he become a human person, but he came and he lived among us. You know, he didn't become a human person and then spontaneously appear in a palace at the top of the highest mountain so that whoever has the courage and whoever has, you know, the most energy and the wisdom to go and find him, for those that can find him at the top of the highest mountain, they would find him. No, that's not what he did. For those who might know the Christmas story, Jesus was born into a very unconventional family situation, and his very first bed was an animal feeding box, and he was born in a stable, a cave where animals were kept. He went to the lowest place, the most unlikely place, and because he loves us and he wants us to know him. He came down to us. He became flesh and dwelt among us. He wants us to know who he is. That way we might better understand who we are and where our great hope might be found. So I think this video is long enough for now. There's a few more other verses about grace and Moses and that Jesus is better and that Jesus is ultimately revealing who God is. Those are all important things, but I think this video is long enough for today. So thank you for listening, and I'm sure in these days of quarantine, when looking for creative and useful ways to spend my time, I'll probably be posting some more videos like this. So if you enjoyed this one today, feel free to make some comments. Let me know. Would love to have a little dialogue if you would like. But thank you for tuning in today. Have a blessed day.